And with us today is Rob Kirby from KIRBY Analytics. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice to hear your voice again, Elijah.
All right. Well, I'd first like to discuss about the situation with respect to currency and gold in India. Now, we were just talking before the interview that they were taking banknotes out of circulation in India, and the goal here, as you were saying, was to kind of stifle demand for gold. But their plan actually backfired. Can you expand on this?
Sure. First, I'd just like to give a hat tip to Dave Kranzler at Investment Research Dynamics, who posted an article on this today, and he was Johnny on the spot with his reporting and his commentary. I think a lot of listeners might be aware that Modi, the leader of India, had withdrawn from circulation the two most popular Indian rupee banknotes from circulation, with a promise to replace them with new banknotes as of the end of last year. And the big issue with that was they didn't have a proper supply of replacement banknotes to put into circulation as they retired the old ones. And the gold trade in India is all physical, as in coins and bars and or jewelry. And that trade is conducted exclusively in paper banknote form. So by withdrawing the old banknotes from circulation, it's believed by most industry insiders that this was an attempt to stifle demand or eliminate demand for physical bullion on the part of central banking communities, specifically the Bank for International Settlements, who was believed to be behind this scheme. And the thinking was they could dramatically impinge or reduce the demand for physical metal by taking the currency out of circulation. And lo and behold, the Indian Ministry of Finance has just reported February gold sales numbers, and the amount of gold bullion that was transacted in February of 2017 was 3 times the amount of February 2016. And we can ring that up as an abject failure and a real slap in the face to the globalist central bank led community who felt that by taking cash out of the Indian market, they could quash demand for physical metal. Their plan has backfired, and I hope they wear the dunce crown very proudly.
So you're saying that this is really bad for globalism right now. And so how does a cashless society, or the taking cash out of circulation, how does that relate to globalism?
Well, the globalist plan is ultimately to have digital money as opposed to physical currency banknotes. And ultimately their true plan is to have everybody chipped so they can turn people on or off. And I'm sure they felt that with the movement towards taking these physical banknotes out of circulation, they were gonna make it almost impossible for people to purchase physical bullion. But instead, the opposite has occurred, because in February of this year, India transacted or consumed or purchased more than 96 metric tons of gold bullion. And let's just remember, February is a very short month, and there are some market wizards, the likes of Citibank, who believe that total annual demand for bullion in India this year was slated to be something in the magnitude of 300 metric tons. Well, when they've consumed 96 metric tons plus in the shortest month of the year, being February, with the strongest consumption part of the year still in front of us in India, let's just say Citibank is likely to be very incorrect with their assumption or their prognostication that Indians would only consume 300 metric tons this year. Seems like they might ring that total up by the end of April.
Now, I'd like to keep our focus on globalism right now, because we've talked about this a lot before, that there are all these things going on in the world, in the past year that have really almost, you've said, really set back globalism, if not really killed the path for globalism to really take hold. Now, some of those things are, Brexit, Trump getting elected and now what's happening in India and all the demand for gold. Now, recently, there's been in the news that, there were elections in Netherlands and there was an anti-EU candidate or anti-European Union candidate politician who, extremely right-wing, and he didn't actually win. He lost the election. What is your perspective on this? Is this a move then in the opposite direction towards globalism, or what is the signal?
Well, my view about Holland is I don't really view Holland as being a true hotbed or a leading candidate for the rejection of globalism, or I don't view Holland as being one of the true leaders of the pack in the populist uprising. I would tend to attribute the countries with the cutting edge populist movements to be France and or Italy. And what's occurred in Holland doesn't really seem to me to be a big spanner in the works of the populist movement really at all. Let's just remember that the populist candidate in Holland didn't exactly have a no-show, but I never really figured on there being a real solid chance of there being a big upset in Holland to begin with. So to me, it's a non-event.
So what are some other signs since the last time we talked that the anti-globalist sentiment is really taking hold?
Well, we see. Look, I mean, yesterday was maybe a good case in point, even though there wasn't follow through today. But we saw the Fed raise interest rates yesterday, and I think most rational thinkers would have assumed on the back of a Fed rate hike with an indication that there's a couple more at least to come this year, would have historically sent the gold market down the chute. And lo and behold, precious metals rallied quite stiffly on a Fed rate hike yesterday, and I think that's actually quite telling. And other sort of markers that we're seeing in this populist uprising, Donald Trump's approval ratings are going up, and that to me is an indication that the globalist or the anti-globalist sentiment in the United States is growing. And since we've last talked, we've seen more outrageous actions on the part of the mainstream press in their futile attempts to try and demonize Trump and demonize the let's call it what most people refer to as the alt-right media. And in my view, this is not gaining traction. And if anything, it's giving more traction among the public who realize that the antics being pulled off by the mainstream press, or what we know as the dying mainstream press, whether it's CNN, NBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, these people are looking more and more ridiculous by the day. They look more and more conflicted by the day. And and this is all being borne out by their ratings. These people are not making money. They're losing their audience because people realize that they've been sold a bill of goods. So, yeah, I would say we're seeing very, very strong positive developments in the populist movement as we move along the time frame here.
All right, and I'd like to discuss a little bit more about what's happening with the Trump administration right now. What is your perspective on this whole, trying to repeal Obamacare and implement a new, get Trump Care or whatever it's going to be called?
Well, it's not Trump
or Ryan Care.
Yeah, it's there we go. It's Eddie Munster Care is what it really is. And why this Paul Ryan hasn't been thrown under the bus and discarded and kicked to the curb as rubbish is beyond me. But my gut feeling tells me that this is going to have to come in time. I mean, he's an old school. He's more aligned. Paul Ryan's more aligned with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer than he will ever be with his own party's candidate and President Trump. The man, in my view, is a complete traitor to his party. He's a traitor to his leader, and he should be discarded.
And do you think that's what Trump is going to do? Because, I mean, it seems like he's just keeps appointing, some very establishment type people. Like, for example, I think it was just yesterday or very recently, he appointed another Goldman Sachs employee to his administration. I think it was as Deputy Treasury Secretary. So you think he's going to move away from doing that kind of thing?
Well, look, I look at it on a couple fronts. I think Trump is giving Ryan every opportunity under the sun to be faithful to the cause, and I feel he's been let down time and again. He's been let down by Ryan, and I think ultimately Trump will be put in a position where he will have to throw him under the bus, which in my view will be a good thing when it happens. And as to this whole notion of people having worked at Goldman Sachs, I would just pass on to your listeners. I had the good fortune of having a house guest last week. Catherine Fitz spent the week with me, and Catherine had a little soiree for some of her subscribers 2 Saturdays ago that I was lucky enough to attend. And I was speaking with one of her subscribers, who's and the subject of Trump came up, and her subscriber, who was very pleased with the stance that Catherine has on issues, he said to me he wasn't very pleased with Trump appointing all these former Goldman Sachs people to work on his team. And I said, well, you got to be a little bit careful when you throw that label on people, because do remember Catherine Fitz also worked at Goldman Sachs a long time ago. And I said, not all former Goldman Sachs people are necessarily committed to the dark side, because Catherine Fitz certainly is not. And she has certainly in the past been the object of the dark side's scorn to the tune of attempts on her life on more than one occasion. So, having worked at Goldman Sachs doesn't necessarily make you a bad person, although it does make one raise eyebrows, I will admit.
All right. Well, moving now to viewers' questions. A lot of viewers are wondering about the possibility of a gold standard in the future. Now, this viewer is wanting to know, do you see the possibility of a future attempt to return to a gold-backed U.S. dollar?
Well, whether or not the dollar ever gets backed by gold again is a good question, I guess. But my feeling is we may return to some kind of a gold or asset-backed currency standard, but it might not be the dollar that is the currency du jour, or the currency that serves as the world's reserve currency. My view personally is that the stewardship of the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency has been handled so poorly that international community is very likely to give the same people who destroyed the U.S. dollar the rights to have a second go at a new currency regime if, as, and when it is introduced. And I do believe one will be introduced, but it probably won't be called the dollar. And I do believe it will have some sort of a tangible asset backing. And they might not want to call it a gold standard, but my guess is gold and or silver will be very prominent in the backing that accompanies the next world reserve currency.
Now, the viewer had a follow-up question to this. They say, if the dollar is backed by gold, then how would America handle its annual trade deficit of about $500 billion with a gold-backed dollar? Wouldn't that cost America about 13,000 metric tons of gold per year at current prices? And I actually checked the math, and the viewer actually got that correct. So, I don't know, you're saying maybe the dollar won't get backed by gold, but how will, with this new world reserve currency, maybe backed by gold, how will America handle its trade deficit? What will happen to its trade deficit?
Well, I'm going to answer that question by saying your viewer might very well have the math correct, but your viewer might be a little bit wrong in what the United States annual trade deficit would be on a go-forward basis. Because if the United States loses reserve currency status, they are suddenly going to find themselves with a much lower living standard, and their trade deficit, these big negative trade deficits, will disappear overnight. And along with that disappearing overnight, the standard of living that Americans have become accustomed to will also disappear overnight. and the repercussions in American society will likely be very, very harsh and very blunt. So, what it'll mean is America, instead of consuming for a living, we'll have to start working for a living, and we'll have to start to generate hard currency, or whatever the new currency unit is that's going to be used in settlement of world trade. And there might be some who would say to me, well, America's never going to stand for that because they have nukes. Well, I'm going to just say there's a lot of countries that have nukes, and there's a lot of countries that are very sick and tired of having to work for a living to sell the fruits of their labor to America, who consumes for a living. And you can figure that one out for yourself.
This next question is about the Fed rate hike. They're wondering if you think the fact that the Fed rate hiked, was that decision politically motivated at all?
In my view, the Fed to me is like a very lousy parlor magician who has gone to the old black hat a few too many times, and one day they're going to go to the black hat and they're going to reach in and there are going to be no rabbits left. I think the Fed's game and their jawboning and they're trying to bully markets is very long in the tooth. And to me, the Federal Reserve has lost a very, very great deal of its respectability and its believability. And I expect that the continued deterioration in people's faith and belief in the Federal Reserve as a meaningful institution will continue to deteriorate, and at an increasing pace.
Now, the U.S. debt limit was actually hit again today at $19.9 trillion. This viewer is wanting to know, what's the likelihood the debt ceiling will be raised again, and what are the ramifications of doing or not doing so?
Well, my view is that ultimately the debt ceiling will be increased because it must be increased, or the U.S. government stops functioning. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think that's in the cards. But what this is really showing, in my view, is the extreme division, not only between Democrat and Republican, but it's really the status quo against the populist leader in Trump, because it seems to me that the Republicans might be as much on side as the Democrats in not giving Trump a debt increase to allow him to carry out his agenda, because both seem to have interest in stopping or thwarting the Trump agenda from being enacted, and I have strong views on why that's occurring on a bipartisan basis. And why both sides of the aisle seem to be hell-bent on stopping Trump from implementing his agenda, and that issue, in my view, pertains to a lot of talk that there's been, particularly in the alternative media, that there's an awful lot of pedophiles on both sides of the aisle in very, very senior positions of leadership who are scared skinny that they're going to be outed by Sessions and Trump.
This question is from Jeffrey, and he's wanting to know if the Exchange Stabilization Fund has significant physical gold reserves, and if so, to what extent has paper gold trading a limited shelf life?
My guess is that paper gold trading does have a limited a limited shelf life, and I think the big reason for that is that I do believe American gold has been squandered and is not present in vaults the way they claim it is. And even if it is present, I got to wonder how many owners it might have. I think America's gold was squandered a long time ago. And I think if America actually had the physical gold they claim to have, we would have seen a very prompt settlement years ago to German requests for return of their sovereign gold. And we would have seen a return of the bars that Germany put on deposit with the Federal Reserve, because they apparently had some gold returned to them, but the bars, so I've read, the bars weren't the same ones that were put on deposit. So let's just put it this way: if America would frig with Germany's gold, you don't think they frigged with their own? So this is the way I think. And fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I don't believe America has the gold they purport to have.
Eddie is wanting to know how holders of gold would benefit from, if they would, and how they would benefit from a gold standard monetary system.
Simply because gold would have to be remonetized. If gold is remonetized, its value would have to be, in nominal terms, adjusted upwards in a very dramatic fashion, because so much currency debasement has occurred since the last time gold backed money. I mean, the money supply has grown by thousands and thousands and thousands of percent since 1971, when President Nixon took America off the gold standard, took the world off the gold standard. And money supply has grown so geometrically up. If currency was going to be backed by gold in nominal terms, its value would have to be reset at an extremely higher level.
Now, I know we've discussed this before, and I believe a lot of viewers have asked this question before, but multiple viewers, again, are asking this. Your thoughts on Bitcoin? I know, actually, just looking at the charts here, it looks like it's near an all-time high. So did you want to give our viewers an update on your thoughts on Bitcoin and your perspective on how it's been rallying recently?
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned Bitcoin on a day like today, because Bitcoin's actually been slammed down pretty hard today. It rallied stiffly yesterday, but it got slammed down today. But all that being said, Bitcoin is dramatically higher today than it was 4 or 5 months ago, close to a double. And my view on it is that it trades like it might be the only financial constituent in all of the financial markets. I hesitate to use the word market when I'm talking about gold or bonds or currencies, because none of them trade like they are free markets. They all appear to be in very short terms rigged. Bitcoin trades like a free market. I'm reluctant to endorse it fully, because I do believe there is a thing called an internet kill switch. And I do believe that the internet itself, we know that the internet was created by the military-industrial complex of the United States, and anything that they create, I believe they have the ability to turn off. Does that mean they're going to turn it off? I can't say that with any degree of certainty, but in my head, the possibility exists. And I'm a little bit hesitant to get fully committed to anything of a crypto nature. Digital anything doesn't tend to be my my friend. I like physical metal that you can go get your hands on, and you can hear it when you drop one coin onto the other, and you hear the real sound of money. But I mean, it trades like it's a real market, and the reason it trades like it's a real market, to remind people, is because you cannot sell a Bitcoin you do not own. And that is not the case in the precious metals markets the way they are currently constructed, because we did see in the aftermath of the U.S. election, we saw 3 years worth of global annual production sold in paper form in 2.5 days immediately after the surprise election results last November. And this is gold that doesn't exist and will never exist. And it was, and yet U.S. regulators, the CFTC, looked the other way as this was happening right under their nose. And we know the reason that they didn't speak about it is because it's U.S. government sources that are condoning or directing the selling, and that's to make their dollar look good when it isn't.
Now, I think this will be our last viewer's question, but they're wondering, what is the likelihood of Glass-Steagall being reinstituted, and what would be the steps necessary for doing so?
Wow. Glass-Steagall, in my view, should never have been repealed, but it was. The odds of getting it put back in by the powers that be, I would say it's a crapshoot at very best. I mean, if it were to be re-implemented the way it used to be, it would severely limit it would severely limit the banks like J.P. Morgan, Citibank, B of A from conducting an awful lot of business that they currently conduct. And I would have it that the derivatives books of these big banks are really effectively doing the bidding of the Exchange Stabilization Fund, whose orders get filtered through the New York Federal Reserve trading desk and on to the banks, who basically implement U.S. monetary policy and U.S. Treasury control of strategic markets, be it interest rates, be it crude oil, be it precious metals. So I can't see a return to Glass-Steagall without a lot of banks kicking and screaming. And if such a thing were to occur, I believe we would be looking at a fundamentally different world than the one we live in right now.
Well, Rob Kirby, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last thoughts you had and where they can find you online?
Well, you can find me online at KIRBYanalytics.com. And I would just remind or hope that people are smart enough to have some representation of physical precious metal in their asset mix. And you might want to do that along with owning some storable food and a good means to defend it all.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure being with you.
Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with Rob Kirby. In this interview, Rob Kirby discusses what he would tell President Trump if he had 30 seconds with him.